Hi everybody, welcome to our fourth week of class and our first audiovisual feedback from your Assignment 3 submissions. And if you remember, that was where you had to freeze up one subject and then blur up another one. So before we get started here, just wanted to point out a couple quick things. So first of all, when we do these critiques, and I hate the word critique because it sort of implies negativity, what we're really trying to do here is help you refine your photography and do things both technically and aesthetically to improve your work. None of this is meant to be put downs or negative personal attacks on anybody. So try to take a little bit of a step back from your work. Don't take any of this personally. And also remember, one of the things that we're dealing with art is that, it's sometimes just a matter of taste. Some people like vanilla ice cream, some people like chocolate ice cream. So there's probably going to be some things that I say here that might not necessarily be 100% true or even in agreement with what your perception of successful or good photography is. So all that being said, take this as just a learning opportunity for you to refine your work. Also, I do just want to emphasize that it's important for everybody to get their images in on the deadline that is put in the module. The reason for this is I like to create these videos for everybody because, as I've heard from former students, this is really helpful, and this is where their learning sort of took those big steps. But unfortunately, if you don't get your stuff in by the deadline, you're going to miss getting them on these videos, because I really want to get these videos done, within a day after your submissions are made. So if stuff isn't submitted by the time I make the video, you're going to have to wait until the next video to get feedbacks, which won't be until the following session. So with that being said, let's get to the photos. So first off, we have Janae's images, and we see her her blurry shot and her frozen shot. One of the things that you're going to see me do a lot is go into Photoshop and call up the file info box, which is right under the file menu items there. And it's really great because we can go in and look at all the information about the photograph and find out what the settings were. So for Janae, she had 1/6 of a second with an f-stop of 13 and an ISO of 800. If you told me, without even looking at a photograph, if you told me that someone was going to take a picture of sports photos and they told me these are the settings that they were going to use, I would tell you that the image would be blurry. And sure enough, Janae, you've done it. This is a great example of a blurred photograph. We've got some movement by the lacrosse player. We can see especially the movement of her foot, that long trailing streak back there. That was the time that the gateway or the shutter was open in the camera. So the shutter opened when her foot was right there, and it closed when her foot was right there. So all of that time that it was open, this was recorded as being a blur. And we can also see here, Janae, it looks like you were kind of panning with the player, which also makes sense. You're kind of following them along. And that's what's giving us this horizontal streaking here, which I think is really aesthetically pleasing in this image. You'll probably see some blurred shots here that don't have the streaking in it. And you can kind of compare between the two. But for me, especially sports images, I find these really appealing and in some ways very different than most sports shots that we see, which are, like your frozen up shot here. I think this is more typical of sports images that we would see, where the player is kind of frozen up in sort of a decisive moment, which you really capture right here. And if we go to our file info, I'm pretty confident we're going to see, yep, fast shutter setting, lower f-stop number, and higher ISO number. So great job with that. Clearly we can see the players frozen up here again. The one thing here, Janae, and you know, it's really not something that's your fault and probably not something you can easily control. You're kind of far away from the subject, and you know, if you've ever seen me shooting these games, you know, I've got this big giant lens, and the reason for this big giant lens is we can just get a little bit closer to the subject and get, you know, a little bit tighter view, and you know, perhaps sometimes capture people's expressions and gestures, and just add a little bit more color to the game here. You know, again, in your position, you probably couldn't get much closer. Although I would say, I'm pretty sure you're a player. So, you know, if you are a player and, you know, you guys are doing this during practice or something like that, perhaps you could, you know, just walk up a little bit closer and get a little bit of a tighter shot. In fact, you know, your other shot here is pretty tight, and maybe this is the kind of tightness that I'd like to see out of your action shot. But again, that's kind of secondary to what we're really focusing in on right here, which is our shutter settings and using them to freeze and blur things. And you totally nailed it here. So good job with that, and look forward to seeing what you have for us this upcoming week. Okay, next we have Timothy's images. And Timothy, you have given me a whole bunch of images of this lighter, which is really cool, where you are basically blurring things. And then you've got the frozen shot here of the parade from what looks like the Eden Corn Fest here. So first of all, I want to go back to this. You also put a nice PDF up here. I really like the fact that you put the PDF up here and you talked about what you were trying to do with each one, and you talked about some of the challenges you had with it, and you know, maybe some refinements you do after, you know, you've experimented a little bit and maybe gained some knowledge. So I love when students do this. This is absolutely wonderful. This is what I'm talking about in giving me reflections, because it helps me get a better understanding of what you're trying to do there. And it also tells me that you're thinking about the images. And I think you guys are going to find there's a theme to everything I say this semester, and that is I just want you to think about your images in a much deeper way and a more intentional manner. And this is really going to be our difference between, you know, taking a picture on our cell phone and, you know, just snapping away, and doing images that are clearly well thought out and intended to be works of art, which, after all, we are taking a fine arts class here. So love that part. The other thing that I really like you did, so you gave me the document with the images embedded in there so I could kind of refer back to them. I also like the fact that you did upload the images out of the camera, because when images are in a PDF, I can't look at them in Photoshop, or at least get the information I need out of them in Photoshop. Whereas from these images that you've uploaded to Photoshop, I do see all the images, all the information that I need here. So, you know, clearly we've got a blurred photo with an exposure of 2 seconds, which is going to blur things for sure. And we can kind of see the movement, almost that glow around the flame as it kind of flickers back and forth. There was also a shot here, you know, we can see sort of the trails of light as the light continues to move away from the lighter as it's being turned or flicked on, or whatever we want to call it. And, you know, it almost kind of reminds me of fireworks shots where, you know, the trails of the fireworks can be seen because that shutter is being left open for a long period of time. So I really like that. And then we've got your image from the Eden Corn Festival. There's one thing I noticed here is that for some reason your camera data got stripped out of here. And I just wonder, again, if maybe you uploaded it to like a Flickr account, or even Google Drive or something like that, and then re-downloaded it, and perhaps that information may have gotten stripped out of there. So if you can, ideally I'd prefer you get me those images right out of the camera that have that information on them. So again, I can see the bubbles are blurred here. That's what I'm looking for. Frozen, obviously, or maybe not so obviously. It's a moving float, so that would freeze things up. And even this little girl in that great gesture of blowing the bubble, I think that's great. However, the one thing, if you recall in the syllabus that you read and acknowledged that you understood all of it, I said that you have to create images, new images for each assignment. And I know the Corn Festival was back in August there, so this is not a new image. So please, note to everybody, and this is we'll give you the mulligan here, but note to everybody, I want you shooting new images. Please don't submit images that you shot before this class, or resubmit images that were shot for other assignments here. Everything you have to shoot here has to be new. The only exception to that would be on your portfolios, both in the midpoint of the class and at the end of the class, where I'd be looking for your best work, and that best work can come from assignments that you've already handed in. So, just again, a little note here, and probably a detail that's easy to overlook in those syllabus. I know there's a lot of stuff in there, so just moving forward, make sure that you're on the same page here, and you're out shooting new stuff. That's how you're going to get better. So get out there, get some new stuff this week, and hopefully you'll have some equally outstanding images. And next up, we have Hannah's work, and we can go right to our file information there. We've got our settings. We see our exposure is 1/6400th of a second, an f-stop of 4, and an ISO of 6400, which is really good. In most instances, I would say, well, 6400 is a little bit high because we're going to start to get some noise, but I think this picture of a dice, to freeze it up, you would have to get an exposure setting of 1/6400th, or I'm sorry, 1/640th of a second. And the only way you're going to do that is by having an ISO that's really high, which allows the imager to be much more sensitive to light, so we can do images like this in a darker area. So maybe let's look at that noise a second. See, if we zoom in here, we can kind of see a little bit of that pixelization. That is what we call noise, and it's pretty normal for shooting at 6400. But I like the fact that you did it here, because it really was your only option, assuming that you're taking this picture in a pretty dark area. So, photography is all about sort of making choices about what the best case scenario is. And it's the best case scenario is not necessarily always a perfect scenario. I'd love to be able to shoot this at an ISO of 100, but there's just not enough light. So you made the right call here, going to ISO 6400, because our dice or our die are clearly frozen up here. So good job with that. And then if we go to this one, two things that I love here. So first, you knew enough to drop your ISO down to 800, which is great, because we don't have to have it high, because once we slow that shutter down, the exposure is going to be easier to get with a lower ISO value. And your exposure of 1/50th of a second, not super slow, but definitely slow enough to blur up those dice. The die, I got to keep using the plural term, are moving very fast, and so you're going to have to use a relatively fast shutter setting, even if it's what might typically be a shutter setting that would freeze things up. So by what I'm saying is, the dice are moving so fast, if you had a super slow shutter setting, we might not even be able to tell that they're dice. You know, it just would be like one long streak. And that's because they're moving really fast. So again, I really like all your shutter setting choices here. I think it's fantastic, and you've clearly demonstrated to me that you understand your camera and you understand these very foundational techniques that we're doing here. So good job with this, Hannah. And next up, we have Maurice's images. So his blurred image with the feet. I love the vantage point on this image, and especially just how the yellow sneaker really jumps out against this very blue background. One of the things that we should point out here is that on a color wheel, which is kind of a device that we use in photography to visually demonstrate where colors are. Maybe I'll call one up here. Let's see if we can just grab a quick color wheel. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pause you. Okay, I'm back, and here's what I'm talking about. So this is a color wheel, and I don't want to confuse everybody too much, because in painting and other art forms, they use color wheels, but the color wheels are slightly different. So for practical and simplicity purposes here, we'll just call this as a photo color wheel. And what about it I just want to show you is we can see sort of on one side of the wheel we have cool colors, and on the opposite side of the wheel we have warm colors. And one of the interesting things about photography that we've observed over the years is that when we include opposite colors with each other in one photograph, so in your case you have a blue background with a yellow sneaker on it, it becomes very visually exciting to our eyes. So this technique, which is probably a technique you'd learn in a more advanced level of photography, you've brought it into your work here, right in your introductory images. So besides getting that blur really perfect, you've also come up with an aesthetic choice, I think, here that really works well. Let's just look at your numbers really quickly. If they're up there. I guess we don't have numbers on your stuff either. But definitely a freeze. And again, definitely a blur. My daughter goes to YMCA camp, and this summer, I should say, and she came home every day covered in dirt. And I would always say to her, "Why are you covered in dirt?" And she said, "I was in the Gaga pit." Well, now I know what the Gaga pit is. It looks like this is a photo of the infamous Gaga pit. So, again, we can see we've got some motion going on here of the ball being, I don't know whether it's kicked or it's tossed or whatever across it, but it's clearly frozen up in the middle of the air. So that definitely works as a frozen photo. However, I do want to point out something. If you notice this image, it kind of looks like someone squished it together from the sides. So, it almost looks like someone pushed in these sides of it. What I think has happened here is, I think when you went to resize the image, you did not keep the proportions locked. So here's what I mean. So if we go into Janae's image that we looked at previously, and we go under image size, this is how you typically resize an image, you can see that she's got a 9:6 image. If we lock that image by clicking this little chain right there, when I go to change the size of that, see I went to 7, it automatically changed the height of it. So I changed the width to 7, the height automatically fell in line, because we are constraining the aspect ratio here. So we're basically keeping the proportion of the height to the width the same. Now, if I was to go back and uncheck this box, check this box and unclick this lock so it's not highlighted like this, then I could go in there and, I could type 12 in there and you'd see the width would change, but the height wouldn't. So when I hit this OK, you're going to see this picture will actually become skewed or kind of stretched out like that. And I think that's what you've done in that photograph there. So just double check when you go to resize your image. Make sure, again, that little box there, it's, again, something tiny that is easy to miss. You want to make sure the resample's checked and the aspect ratio lock is clicked on there. So other than that, great job here. Again, pretty confident that you've mastered this technique and are ready to move on to the next photo. So look forward to seeing what you have for us next class. So next up we have Deodric's photos. So we're looking for a jump shot that is frozen and a panoramic or landscape type of shot that's blurred here. And so if you look at this image, really, and by the way, I just want to point out, Deodric, and maybe it was my fault on instructions here not being clear. And I know that on our previous 2 assignments, I had you guys doing Word documents and embedding the images in there. For the rest of the assignments, I'd like you to submit your images separate from your reflection document. That way we can actually take those images and open them up in Photoshop and look at all of that critical information. Because right here, I can't look at your file info settings. And the problem here is you've got motion. If you look at her feet there, they're blurry. And that is probably telling me that, not probably, it is telling me that we've got a slow shutter setting here. So I'd love to be able to go in and look at your shutter setting and see what it is and help you out and get you the right ones. But I can't, unfortunately, because it's embedded in this PDF and that information isn't available to us with PDFs. So whatever your shutter setting is here, you've gotta kind of raise it a bit. So a shot like this, I would say you should be shooting at 1/500th of a second if your intention is to blur it. And then your second image here, definitely a nice blur. We can see that horizontal blur going on here. It looks like your camera's kind of panning to the right. I can live with that. The thing is, it is a little bit overexposed. So you really have 2 options here to get correct exposure. You can lower your ISO. That's going to make the image darker. Or you can select an f-stop number that is higher than whatever you used. So, for example, let's say you used an f-stop of 8. We would want to move that f-stop up to something like 16 or 22 here. So, you're definitely there on the blur. You are not there on the frozen. So we need you to continue to work on that. I do wonder, Deodric, were you working with Tori from my other class? Because here are Tori's images. Jumping. And the panoramic shot. So I have, if you guys were working together, no problem with that whatsoever. You guys certainly are more than welcome to work in pairs on assignments and bounce ideas off of each other, and that's fine. But both you and Tori in your images, unfortunately, kind of had the same problem here. You can see for the frozen one, he's kind of blurred. And your blurring one was okay there. So it's okay to bounce ideas off each other, work with each other, and especially like this where you are having subjects, do some, act as models, I guess we would call it for you. It's okay. I don't mind that at all. Just make sure that you guys get the techniques correct, because it seems like with both of your submissions, the technique is a little bit off. So work on that, and if you're struggling with it, or there's some confusion, or any way I can help you out, certainly shoot me an email or give me a buzz or make an appointment. We can get together on campus and just go over things. It's especially important at the beginning of the game here because I want to get you guys off on a good foot here. So let's create a good foundation, and the rest will be easy for the rest of the semester. So let me know. And next up, we have Matthew's images, and we've got his frozen. A bunch of you guys have called it still photo. I think I'd prefer that we use the terminology frozen, at least for now, because there's a thing called a still life photo in photography, and we even use the term still life in painting. And that typically tends to be sort of like a staged tabletop kind of photograph. Think the traditional like fruit basket that you would see in a painting or a still life. So just that's a super minor thing, but just something to keep in mind as we're labeling things. And then your blurry shot. So both these look good. I would fully expect when I look at the file info here that yep, we've got slow shutter setting, absolutely, low ISO, high f-stop. Here's the formula, everybody. Matthew has it for you. Slow shutter setting, 1/125th, high f-stop number, 16, maybe even 22, and an ISO of 100. That is going to be gold outside on a sunny day with blurring stuff. So good job with that, Matthew. Like it a lot. Like the image. We kind of get the sense of these guys having fun, playing around, the movement of activity around this game. So works really well for me. And then your frozen shot, ball is frozen up in the middle of the air. Again, I would totally expect that your settings are going to be where they need to be here. Yep, 2/50th of a second, f5.6, and an ISO of 100. So that works. Maybe if I wanted to be absolutely sure I was going to get this frozen, I might raise this exposure to 1/250th or 1/5000th, and correspondingly change that ISO up to 200 or 400 to make sure that that exposure is consistently correct. Only other thing that I would say here, aesthetically, maybe I'd like to see him move the frame over here. There's a lot of empty space over here that's really not adding much value to the photograph. So perhaps we just slide our vantage point over to the right a little bit here and fill the frame a little bit more with some of the guys, probably just like you did in the previous image. But again, for now, kind of a minor point. And the thing that I'm really worried about here, or in your case not worried about, is the use of the technique, which you've definitely mastered here. So good job with this. So next up we have D'Angelo's images, and D'Angelo was at the beach enjoying the weather with his friends in Rochester, and certainly a great area to take some images. By the way, just again, as I've said to a couple other people, make sure from now on the images that you shoot, you upload separately from your reflection papers here. Again, I sense that maybe I wasn't clear enough in my instructions, so I'll take the blame on this as much as anybody. But for all of us, just so we're on the same page, make sure your images are in separate submissions from your Word document. So, you guys are seeing here in the video, I can actually go in and see what you're doing. So this is your frozen shot, and this is your blurred shot. The blurred shot works, absolutely. We can see, the movement in his hands here, and especially in the feet, which typically are the parts that are moving the fastest. So great job on the blur shot. This is absolutely a frozen shot. We can see the oars are clearly frozen in the little droplets of water. However, there's a little caveat here. You used a flash on this photograph, and a flash will actually freeze things up even with a slow shutter setting. So while you have frozen things up, the flash, and if you think about it, the flash is like kind of a super fast burst of light. which, can be 1/1000th of a second or 1/500th of a second, which does act to freeze things up. So in that sense, you did freeze things up. But I'd prefer that you guys didn't use your flash, because the flash does kind of add a little element of confusion here. So if at all possible, try to complete your assignments without the flash. Again, I think I mentioned that, but if I didn't, I'll just reinforce this again to everybody. Please don't use flash on your assignments, because it just is adding an additional factor in here that when we're trying to put down a foundation can be kind of confusing. So for the next assignment, just avoid that flash for me. But other than that, I think, certainly have a sense of what's frozen and what's blurry, and like the images, from an aesthetic perspective, really a real lot. So good job with that. Just keep an eye on that flash for me. And next up, I have the savvy veteran of my classes, Dominic. And hopefully at this point, after having me for a year, Dominic, you should have this technique mastered pretty well. And it certainly looks like you do. We've got the blurry water coming out of the faucet here. And we're going to look at your info. And if we look at the camera, your camera data is not embedded in there. Again, I think what's happening with a lot of these files is that maybe you guys are uploading them to a Google Drive or something like that, and then downloading them, and the information is getting stripped off of them. So make sure you have that information embedded in the images before you submit them. And if you're struggling with that, again, give me a buzz or an email, and I'll talk you through that. And then your second image, the frozen shot of the guy with the club in the middle of the air. Yeah, definitely a great shot here. I love the decisive moment, and the freezing up of the head of the club, and even, the muscles in his forearm there are just really prominent in there. So very well done. I think the image definitely works for me. If we were to talk about, this similar type of image on the pro end of things, I think I'd like to see your background out of focus. The background kind of looks really busy here, and especially that fence kind of cuts into the nice line that the golf club shaft is making. So let me see. I'm going to put you on hold here a second, or pause, and I'm just going to call up a shot for you. So I just did a quick little Google for golf images or golf photos, and this is what I came up with. Here's a good example, kind of similar to your shot in that it's a golfer with the club raised before he's going to strike it. Just notice how that background, though, is a little bit soft and a little bit out of focus. This is something we'll work on this week in this assignment. This is called a shallow depth of field. And when we have that out of focus in the background, it kind of draws our attention a little bit better to the golfer as opposed to the busyness of the background. And let me see, it's funny, we're going through all these, we're seeing like tons of Trump shots. I'll spare everybody the pain of calling one of those up. But anyhow, we can kind of see it like on this golf ball shot where that background is just completely out of focus and it goes really soft. Now, you can do shots where the background is completely in focus, and I guess, something like this would be a good example of it. But notice how the club and her body silhouette are sort of up against a clean background of the sky here. And in that instance here, then we have, a little bit easier forms and shapes to digest as opposed to in your image that we'll show you here again. There's just a lot of busyness because he's up against the house. And the house particularly has a lot of vertical lines that kind of make the image look very choppy. So just keep that in mind. Keep your background, keep the perception of your background in the forefront of your mind as you're taking images. I know it's easy to get kind of focused in on what you're shooting and forget about the background. But I think this is a good example of where a clean background really would have helped. And next up we have Sydney's photographs. And first photo is of a soccer player. And we look at the shutter settings, exposure 1/400th of a second. That is perfect. And we look at your player, and she is kind of almost like she's suspended in midair as she's running, kind of in that spot that we like to call the decisive moment, where she's kind of caught at the peak of her movement. Now, ideally, I'd love to see the ball in the photograph. In fact, part of me is kind of looking over here wondering, geez, what the heck's going on over here? Here's kind of the interesting thing. But nevertheless, at this point, I'm more concerned about the technique than I am the composition and makeup of your photographs. So from that perspective, I think that your image is fine for this assignment. And then the image of the fan. Really like this shot. It's interesting though, fans move really fast, and I haven't looked at your settings yet. So it'll be interesting to see where it's at, because you certainly could probably use a faster shutter setting and still get some blurring with the fan. So drum roll, please. And it's not there. Disappoint me, Sydney. Anyhow, I don't really know what that is, but I suspect that might be like a 30th of a second, maybe even slower than that. And certainly we see that really, really distinct blurring in there in this image. So that definitely works for me. I do have to say, virtually every semester, I get a picture of a fan from somebody for this assignment. So thank you for keeping that streak alive, Sydney. I know that fans are a pretty obvious example of something to use this technique on. So I definitely get it here. But for everybody, try to just stretch your creative genius as we move forward in these assignments for the rest of the semester. So good job with this, Sydney, and look forward to seeing what you have in the upcoming assignment. So to wrap things up here in this video, we have Victoria's images. And Victoria, really love the time that you've taken to do your reflections here. I think everything is very accurate and appropriate here, except for one little thing. And maybe it's just the terminology usage. You use a higher ISO to capture the motion. Yes, you would use a higher ISO for this, but you're not slowing down the shutter speed. You're actually speeding it up. And when we talk about speeding it up, we're speeding up how fast that shutter doorway opens and closes. So I'm guessing that this image was probably taken, at 1,000th of a second or 500th of a second to capture this whirlpool jet boat going through the thing. Again, one of the things I just want to restate and emphasize to everybody, don't put your images in PDFs anymore, because when we put them in PDFs, I can't look at the settings on them. So I can't really tell what the setting is on this. And this image looks a little blurred, but I suspect it's just the blurring that we're getting from the resizing of it going to a PDF here. Because your other image, your blurred image, boy, what a beautiful shot. I love this, very creative, very unique. I love the way you're using the blurring of the hair here to create sort of like a really soft, moody feel to this. So love this, and I suspect if we were to put a number on this, maybe you're shooting at a 30th of a second or something like that. Oh, I'm sorry, this is my fault here. So that was for your second photo here, and you are correct here. Actually, that was my fault. So erase what I just said there a sentence or two ago. Yes, for this bottom shot, absolutely, we slow down the shutter setting, and for sure that blurs her hair in this shot. So again, like this shot a lot. Really beautiful image, and kind of different from what I've seen out of everybody for this assignment. And really didn't talk about your settings in this one, so we don't really have that information there. So again, good job, Victoria. I get, generally speaking, that you understand this technique, and I think more importantly, I think that you're beginning to understand the idea of creating images that have some thought put into them. And if nothing else, I hope that all of you guys come away from this course with the idea that photographs, especially ones that we consider art, need to have a little bit of thought and meaning included in them, as opposed to something that we just pick up a cell phone camera or mobile phone camera and just point and snap away at. So good job here, Victoria. Look forward to seeing not only what you do next assignment here, but everyone, and just emphasizing for the next one, please make sure that you are submitting the photos separately from the Word or PDF document that has your reflections in it. So good job, everybody. Just to wrap things up too here, want to say that we did have a few people that didn't submit this week. Please make sure you get your submissions in by the deadline so we can include them in these video critiques. And of course, if anybody wants me to expand upon some of the points that I've talked about here, or if you have any confusion about what's going on, definitely don't hesitate to reach out and get in touch with me, and we'll talk about it a little bit more and hopefully get you past whatever hiccup you might be having there. So everybody have a good week, enjoy the weather, and we'll be back at you with another video sometime about this time next week. So take care.